everyone, welcome into CMS Connected here on the Pulse Network. I'm your host, Tyler Pybron, and as you guys just saw that main slide, we have an awesome show for you today. It's the 2011 Year in Review. I'm talking all the news, all the notes, some of the headlines, events, major changes within the last 12 months. It'll be a lot of fun, and we are going to absolutely love it. And of course, we are here, as always, with, I guess he's become my co-host now, Scott Lewer.
Right.
Scott, how you doing today?
Great, Tyler. Thanks.
Excellent. So in case you were wondering exactly a little bit more about Scott, Scott happens to be not only the host of the CMS Connected show, he is also lead analyst for web content management at Outsells Gilbane Group. He's an author and a regular speaker on subjects of web content management, web engagement, and customer experience management as well. And he is also the elected president of CM Pros, an association serving nearly 19,000 content management professionals worldwide. Scott, you've got quite a title, my friend.
Filling out.
The more the merrier. That's the way we like it. But also, as you guys just saw a few seconds ago, sitting right next to Scott, we have Seth right now. Seth Gottlieb. Seth has been working in the content management field for the better part of 15 years as a CMS industry analyst and recently hired at Linebridge. So Seth, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you.
I know you and I have got a chance to talk quite a bit, so we were testing the little microphones before, and Seth, he told me everything there is needed to know about his entire trip here to Boston. So Seth, glad you could be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, so before we really get into today's topic, we also have to acknowledge our CMS Connected sponsors because they're the ones that really help bring this show to life and put it on. First off, we have Falcon Software, of course. Falcon provides web creative, e-commerce content, management, social media, and mobile solutions for organizations across the globe. And of course, not only do we have Falcon, but we also have CM Pros. Now, CM Pros helps its members by enhancing their knowledge and expertise, sharing practices, and connecting members from all over the world. Now, I also would like to let you guys know that a little bit later on in the show, we've got a special guest coming up. Tom Wentworth from Ectron is going to be joining us via Skype in just about 10-15 minutes. So make sure you sit tight for that because you will not want to miss it whatsoever. So like I said, we've got a great show lined up for you today. So what do you say? We go ahead and get this thing actually started. So we're going to start and we're going to get it kicked off by really looking at CMS 2011, the year in review, if you will. So guys, are you ready? Let's get this thing going.
Absolutely.
All right. So Seth, let's kind of start with you. And kind of an open-ended question, really. As far as web content management is concerned, how was the definition of web content management really reshaped in 2011?
Sure. Well, I would say the biggest change has been mobile. And it's funny to say that because I feel like I've been waiting for that for like 10 years. Mobile is just around the corner. Well, I feel like just last year, that's when mobile just hit everybody in the face and they were unprepared for it. Despite all that warning coming up, I think that a lot of people are not pleased with the way their websites are looking on multiple devices like phones and iPads.
And different phones for that matter too, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
That's the one thing that I think a lot of people forgot is, it works on the iPhone, but it's not necessarily compatible with their BlackBerry, with their Android, so on and so forth. I mean, what's your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think I think the definition of CMS has come into question even far more this year than in previous years. It used to be pretty clear-cut, right? And now I think with the advances from the vendors starting to take on new, whether it's analytics capabilities or other things of that sort, I just think the pen that was around the WCM definition has expanded pretty significantly and started to be a lot more inclusive. And so there's some fuzziness then well, where does WCM stop and some of these other things start? And I think there's a fair amount of confusion.
Yeah, exactly.
Some lively debates. Was it a tough year then? Just from gauging you guys, was it a tough year as far as WCM's concerned? Or?
I don't think tough. As a matter of fact, I even think that which is confusing to many, right, when you're trying to figure out one product versus the other. I think the nice thing about it is the focus has been on the term engagement or customer experience or whatever it is. So the conversation has shifted from a kind of a techie focused one to that of thinking from the perspective of the people who are on the other end, who are looking at your website, right? So this whole notion of engagement or customer experience has really changed it so that vendors are more focused on that, users. I mean, I think even when I'm working with clients a lot, and I'm sure you see this too, Seth, is sometimes they'll come to me and I'm trying to understand what their business needs, and it takes a while to get that out of them. It's more so just make it easier on that. So it's like, what is that doing to move your business forward?
Sure. If you could say it easily, what would you say? I think that would be a big piece because definitely the content entry, the content production part is a solved problem. It's commodity. You can buy really inexpensive tools or just download them to do that. But what do you do with the content once it's there? How do you leverage that content to create a more engaging experience for the customer?
Right.
And especially so, I think one of the things that we deal with it here at the Pulse quite often is the amount of content. I mean, that seems to be skyrocketing as well, doesn't it?
Sure. How do you direct people to the content that they need and not create a unfulfilled experience looking at things that they don't want to see?
Yeah, I think there have been people out there beating that drum for a really long time, right? Whether it's your, content marketing has really, I think, come into the forefront of, within the web web content management world, we've been a lot more exposed to the content marketing industry and the content strategists and that sort of thing. And they've always been out there talking about this, right? But I think just finally that message is resonating and we are focused on a bit more on that, which we should be focused on.
So I want to kind of focus on something that you guys had just said, and I kind of want to move on to the next question I had for you. It's really focusing on online customer engagement, really, because it's really on the tip of really everybody's tongue right now. Everybody's talking about, well, we need online customer engagement. You guys just said it, how that's really focusing right now. So my question to you is really, Scott, I'll start with you. Why is it so important, and who's using it right now?
Sure. So I think, so what is it? I think the first thing is it's a means to which how to connect with your audience, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you parallel it to any sort of a conversation that we might have, that I as a brand might want to have with my audience, it's around any conversation you need to be able to, if I want to influence you, I need to first be able to understand what your needs are. I need to have a way for you to express those to me in some way and for me to kind of catch your clues and understand therefore what you're interested in so that I can position back to you what I can offer to you in a compelling and a relevant way. And I think that's what the notion of this online engagement is attempting to do. And so there's a whole lot of technologies that set themselves up to try to play in various parts of that, whether it's that listening capability and you're using the likes of analytics or you're using profiles to track so that you can keep a consistency from one online conversation to the next so that you're building on each other and they're more cumulative than they are individualistic in nature. That's kind of what engagement is trying to achieve. And I think web content management plays a role in that. I've not loved the idea of calling web content management systems web engagement systems, but we can go there later, I suppose.
Well, it's funny because at the end of the day, we're really trying to reach audiences.
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
And I think that earlier, probably ending with about 2 years ago, the big problem was, how do we get content onto the website, right? And so the value proposition was workflow and publishing, content production and publishing. I think by and large the market has failed to really leverage that value. Because if you go into a company, you see that by and large they're putting in content at the end of the process. If they have a workflow, it's either outside of the content management system or maybe it's just a single person updating the website. So if that's all you're trying to do, just update your website, fix typos on your website, which, if you've seen a lot of web demos, it's kind of like what they're selling. There are really inexpensive tools to do that. So the upper end of the market, I think, had to tell a new value story. And that is the other side, which is once the content's there, how do you get the most out of it? And I think that's what's exciting about engagement because we've commoditized the content entry problem. And now we're getting into the what do you do with the content that's there and really understanding the users to create a tighter loop in that conversation.
And when we keep talking about content, we're talking about engagement. It's multi-channeled as well. I think that's one thing to really focus in on because I think a lot of people will look at that and say, well, how are you interacting with the customers? It's all over the place and it's in multiple different forms as well.
It is all over. And again, that the necessity for consistency of message. I just told the analogy, so forgive me, the other day, if you've heard this before, of the restaurant. I have 3 children, 4, 2, and a baby. So when we like to go out to a restaurant on Friday nights, we have some very specific needs. So there's one that we go to a couple times a month. They know when we come in, the hostess greets us. She sits us at the table in the back, probably, for their sake as much as ours. They bring out the menu right away. They bring the kids food, not overly hot. All these things that help make that experience easier. The bill comes fast. They know what they like. I can get in and get out, and it's not as much of a hassle for me. If I were to go back to that same place and they didn't recognize me, they seat me in a different place. Or if I were to go and see that same hostess elsewhere, outside of that restaurant environment, she didn't recognize me whatsoever, I kind of feel a little bit put off. Same thing translates to your website. You don't have to know tons of personal information about your customers, right? They don't know my last name, anything like that, but there's a relationship there based on my interaction there. They know enough about me to make my experience pleasurable, continue moving forward. I gain some, I'm loyal to that place. I go back every single time. And in terms of your cross-channel point, again, if their interaction with me is similar even in other mediums, and if you suddenly lose that because you're so separated between the restaurant and running into them in the store, if you all of a sudden don't know who they are on the mobile side or whatever, you lose credibility, right? Sure. I think that conversation, if it doesn't pick up, you lose credibility.
Yeah, and there's an enormous amount of information that you can have just with one visit during the length of a certain session. You have context and what platform they're on and the time of day and all that, and you also have behavior. Chances are they've entered a term into your search box, so they're telling you what they want. They're telling you their intent. So there's a lot that you can do with that. But it's surprising that that more sites don't really take advantage of that, and I think that the reason why is just like in your restaurant, it takes a lot of effort and attention to pay attention to these things.
That's right.
And to understand that you're a family. I mean, you can't just show up as an employee and not pay attention to your customers. Right. A lot of companies aren't really prepared to pay that attention,
to those things.
And to have people monitoring and figuring out what people are trying to do and to adjust the experience to help serve that session better. Mm-hmm. They just don't have that. They're back in the broadcast where they just put the stuff out, right. And hopefully people will find it.
That's right.
Excellent.
Spewing mode, right? Yeah. Interruption marketing.
It definitely is at this point. So, okay, we need to move on just a little bit more, and let's talk about pricing as well as focus and market focus, because I think that's a really interesting debate as to what really took place in 2011. Leading .NET web CMS vendors, Ectron and Sitecore, they raised their prices in 2011, but switching from the focus from mid-market to the enterprise level right now. Now, the question really is right now, did they catch some of the larger vendors kind of asleep at the wheel? And are those larger vendors evolving to kind of, look at that new competitive pricing? So we'll see exactly how it's going to work. So to answer this question, we're going to go ahead and bring in Tom Wentworth from Ectron right now. Tom happens to be the CMO of Ectron. Tom, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, Tyler, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So, Tom, you're into the discussion right now. You've heard what these folks have been talking about so far. So I'm kind of anxious to get your opinion and thoughts of why Ectron basically did that pivot right there and made the move to more the enterprise level.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that a lot of the innovation that's happened in this market, I've got a good perspective having worked at Ectron now for about 2 years, but then prior to Ectron spending about 10 years at Interwoven and then a year at Autonomy after the acquisition. So I've been at sort of the big side of this marketplace for most of my career. And now at Ectron, I think what's happening is the innovation is really being driven by companies like Ectron and Sitecore and others. And it's not so much that our prices are going up. I think it's just the kinds of customers we're selling to have needs beyond the basics. So I think Seth captured it earlier. The demonstrations of yore were all about showing somebody fixing a spelling error on a website. And now it really is about helping tell the story around how marketers can better generate business outcomes on their website, which obviously is a much more valuable story. So I think it's not so much about our prices have gone up as much as we're selling to the kinds of companies who value what we deliver from a business outcome standpoint in a website, not so much just the kind of core web content management from 10 years ago.
Okay.
Do you find, hey, how's it going, Tom? This is Scott Lewer.
Hey, Scott.
Do you find yourself selling to a different audience nowadays? I mean, do you see the buyer shifting at all?
Yeah, so I just did a really deep analysis of my customers. As a matter of fact, for a recent internal meeting we had, it's about 60% marketing, 40% IT, which is a little bit less marketing heavy than I kind of thought it was going to be. There's still a fair number of IT buyers who lead web content management projects. But definitely that number was probably 70-30 5 years ago. And now there's a lot more marketers who both own the budget, but of course they own the results a website generates.
So I'm anxious to know, in your mind, do you think Extron can kind of compete with the larger vendors? I mean, what's your thoughts with this?
Yeah, well, I know we can. That's one of the reasons I came over to here from Autonomy, to be frank with you. Again, I think a lot of the acquisitions that have happened in the space, whether it's Autonomy or whether it's Adobe or whether it's FatWire, when you get acquired by a bigger company, you end up spending a lot of your resource focused on bringing together all the technologies from the acquired company. So Autonomy spent a lot of time trying to bring in their idle technologies, and Adobe spending a lot of time bringing in all their Omniture technology, and that's really important. But I think what happens is you end up spending less time on innovation in some of the core areas, and that's a lot where I think Sitecore and Extron have done a good job moving this market. We haven't been distracted by acquisitions, which has let us focus on, really what the core new capabilities around areas like mobile and multi-channel and engagement. And, we can certainly do that as good as, if not better than a lot of these bigger vendors.
So Seth, what's your thoughts on what Tom's saying right now?
Well, I think that it's very true. I think that the pure play web content management vendors have a clear advantage if they're able to stay on that topic of creating tools that marketers can use to reach their audiences. I think that the large acquisitions by the infrastructure players, it's hard for them to get excited about user experience and delight of using a tool because it's really about putting together a big architecture that they can use to sell into a lot of different parts of the organization. So I feel like the middle market is doing a great job in surging and answering specific business-oriented requirements rather than selling to architects that are trying to put together an architecture that hangs together better but maybe doesn't delight the users.
Scott, when we go back to what he was just saying a few moments ago, what Tom was saying, and he was discussing the largest and the larger and the largest vendors. Who are they? Who are the big players, really?
Sure, you've got the kind of ECM vendors, the big ones of those. So you've got the Oracles that are still hanging around. You've got Adobe is now considered one of the larger players since they've brought in, since they've acquired, I guess it's been nearly 2 years now, 18 months ago or so, Day Software. You've got Autonomy, which Tom hails from, picked up the Interwoven. So you've got some of those, of course Microsoft is there, of course OpenText is there. So those are kind of your largest players. And I think that's who he's going after. But the funny thing is so many of them, their strategy is about picking up some of these smaller ones, right? So FatWire just is now going to start to become kind of at the forefront of Oracle. And again, Adobe's got Day at the forefront. So essentially, they're still pummeling it out with the same level of folks who have just been adopted and acquired by some of the larger vendors who are kind of casting out those former ECM players where they used to have kind of the old mindset that web content is just another document and we can look at it that way.
Just a different
and
extension.
then now they've kind of come around to realize this is unique.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think it'd be really interesting to see what Oracle does. Like they already have Stellent. They're buying FatWire. Will they allow the FatWire group to lead the way Adobe has allowed the Day group? Because it's been really impressive to see how Adobe has adopted the Day vision of the web. They've definitely done a big turn from what they've done prior to that, where the web was just a protocol to deliver Flash and PDF. Day's vision is really alive in Adobe. Will Oracle make that adjustment?
Yeah.
We'll definitely be talking about a lot of the acquisitions a little bit later on. But I want to go back to Tom real quick. Tom, did you have a question for him, Scott? Excellent. Okay. I was going to say, I looked over, I saw Scott kind of chomping at the bit, ready to ask you another question. So feel free.
I wanted to give you one more question. So I know that you specifically, you guys have done a really big re-architecture of your product, and I wonder. To me, where we're all talking about web content management being near the center of this kind of ecosystem of lots of tools and capabilities, certainly integrations with a lot of enterprise applications are going to be key for a platform like yours, which is looking to pivot into that larger enterprise. Do you feel like you had to have done this kind of shift over in your architecture, this overhaul, in order to be competitive in that? Because I wouldn't have felt, frankly, before, I would have thought that some of those IT organizations might have looked at you a little bit cynically, given your former technology. Did this shift help you pivot into the enterprise?
Yeah, I think it did. So when I came to Actron in 2009, there was an ongoing engineering project to really kind of take a look at the core platform and say, what are some changes that we need to make to be competitive and also to, really accelerate our story around enterprise architecture and developers. So we built a brand new API. We made very significant performance enhancements and looked at how we did things like caching and put a lot of investment into the back end of our platform, which isn't, nearly as sexy as, spending a bunch of time on the front end, which we also did as well with our 8.5 release. But the last 2 years, we spent a lot of time really focusing on architecture. And I think that pays off now with your ability to support companies like Walmart and Microsoft and Citigroup who are all using Ektron today. So it's a lot of hard work, and we've definitely ended up with a platform we feel pretty good about.
I think you did a really good job. I mean, it's a challenge because right now we all know that marketers are buying these platforms. So how much of an architecture can you tell? How much of an architecture story can you tell a marketer? But what you need to do is deliver a product that your developers won't complain about.
Yeah.
And I think with the latest release, I heard the phrase, a love letter to developers. So the developers are the ones that are answering the request from the marketing department, but they can't complain about the product, and I think that you've done a really good job to quell that complaining.
And I think the answer, when I talk to marketers, you need, the scale with which companies operate today with just the pure volume of content, but now that we're so focused on the business outcome part of our story, you need scale. You need to be reliable. You need to be performant. So I think now vendors like Ektron and others, we have to think about scale and architecture, or we're not going to have a viable solution for the marketers we all want to sell to. So I think architecture matters. And I think in the .NET world specifically, there are some vendors like Ektron that are really focusing on their architecture and have made big gains there.
And Tyler, keep in mind here when we're talking about these guys positioning themselves and orienting towards the marketing buyer, that's not mutually exclusive from the IT buyer. It's just a question of who owns the dollars and who owns the budget specifically, but it's certainly not the case that IT is no longer an influencer at that table, right? You've still got to get past the gates of the IT folks. And even we talked about this last month on the show with Arena and stuff, and I tried to make the point a number of times that you want IT to be your friend in this. They need to be very comfortable with your selection, or you will fail. So they have a better understanding of how it's going to integrate, those sorts of things. So you absolutely have to have that.
Excellent. Hey, Tom, got to tell you, really a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks so much for taking time out today, jumping on the show with us. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. And I put on a sport coat for you today, so I thought I'd fit in.
Excellent. He is Tom with Ektron. Tom, great talking with you. Thank you so much. So, great conversation so far, guys, but we definitely have to continue to move on and move the conversation along. And, one of the things you had mentioned before, Seth, you had talked about, mobile being one of the things that everybody was looking for in demand and how it was reshaped. Another thing that people are really in demand for seems to be the cloud right now. I'm sure this is what you guys are thinking as well. And the question right now is, a lot of people are wondering, when we're seeing these different crashes out there, are we better off in the cloud? I mean, are we?
It depends who you are. If you're the kind of company that has a competency in capacity planning and data center management and all that, like you've got very specific requirements around security and about scale, maybe the cloud's not for you. But if you're like most companies that don't have those skills and resources, probably the cloud's better than you can do on your own. You're not going to have generators. The cloud has generators. And the cloud failures that we've been seeing, you could say that that they're high visibility and everybody's laughing at the cloud's not ready for prime time. But like, I think that's a little bit like us laughing at the wide receiver that drops the ball. Like, could we have caught that ball? Maybe if we were a good football player, but most marketing organizations or most companies, they're not that great network operations organizations. So maybe the cloud's better than what they could do on their own.
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I think that's given the failures and the publicized failures that they've had have actually been created a forum for more conversations about the cloud. I think that's it's actually helped the cloud.
Sure.
And what I've heard from folks over at Rackspace or at Amazon is actually that they're getting more and more uptake from this. They have the ability to now come in the story. When you're talking about server availability and that kind of stuff, network availability, you're talking about in the nines, right? So it's 0.99 uptime, 0.999 uptime, that's what you're questioning. So your average IT organization is tenfold plus difference, worse, away from the uptime that these guys can guarantee you. And when they get to come in and tell that story, because again, it's the alternative is, somebody's got to catch the ball. Would you rather have it be the guy who just dropped it, or are you going to go try it yourself? And so when you shift the conversation like that, they've actually gained a lot more traction, I think, in the last year than anything.
And after the headlines played, you had some analysts going out there and saying that if you deployed in the cloud properly, which would have been very expensive, so maybe they wouldn't have made that choice even if they knew about it, and they went to the different data centers in a more redundant way, they wouldn't have had those outages. But most people weren't ready to pay for those extreme, 10 nines of availability. Yeah.
Especially when we're looking at it because, take it from a consumer perspective and you see, like you said, the outages and you wonder, wait a minute, what's going on? So, from the layperson, sitting back and you see this actually happen, you have to question credibility. I think for me, not inside the space by any stretch, and I say, oh, what's going on? And you almost wonder if they lose credibility. Is that really the case? Or no, you say, no, they're still head honchos in this.
I tie my brand to the Amazon brand any day of the week.
Exactly.
If I'm just as credible as Amazon is, then I'm feeling pretty good about my brand right now. So.
Yeah, exactly. And if all the Amazon sites are out, it's not really your fault. But if it's just your site that's out, it's a little bit more embarrassing.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. Excellent. Great stuff, guys, so far. We're going to continue to move on. I want to talk about Web CMS because a lot of people want to know the role. So the question right now is, what role does the Web CMS play in the strategy for a social enterprise? I'll start with you on that one.
Well, somehow you got to publish the content that everybody's going to link to and talk about. So that it probably all starts there. So getting pages out there on the website, that's the first thing you need to do in your web content management system is certainly how you do that. And then also the scalability, because social tends to be very peak and valley. If you put something out there that is all of a sudden very, very compelling, traffic could go way up. So perhaps capacity planning, and again, we're getting, not to go back too far in the cloud, the other thing that's nice that you could just add nodes to an infrastructure very easily. You don't have to have planned for that in advance. But the other part is just, it's a difficult problem to figure out of where am I publishing, all these different social networks that you could be publishing on, and how do you keep from getting distracted? It's not so much a web content management problem, but it's a where do I publish problem, and how do I, once I engage a user someplace else, how do I bring them back there to where I want them so I can really influence what they see.
It almost goes back to the word engagement, what we were talking about before. It really does.
I'm going to make the same point. Essentially, you're just talking about the socialization even of your own content, right? Such that now, if you can allow for what we're talking about features and functions is user-generated content and commenting capabilities and liking, and for other folks to be able to help to share your content and spread it with their friends who are in their sphere of influence as well. And so now you're writing for crowds now, and you have the ability, sure, in some small percentages you're getting some direct feedback, but people are much more easily able to pass along your content, and that kind of understanding. It's just, again, more of the body language, essentially, sure, that you don't necessarily see typically. Kind of social becomes the body language of the online world, I guess, that you can kind of gauge reactions and gauge feedback, I think, to some of what you're doing. The other thing is it also gives you a lot of information that you can tie back to. So if somebody, Facebook likes your content nowadays, it's much less about being on Facebook, I think, and more about the fact that now you get to get their information and what other things they like, and how can you tie that back into the other offerings that you have. So, big steps there, I think.
Excellent. Really great stuff. So we've got a pretty interesting part of the show right here, because it was an interesting poll and an interesting article that was in fact published on CMS Wire. Now CMS Wire published a poll that showed that 45% of those polled see mobile, as you had said before, Seth, mobile as the key to their customer experience strategy. So right now, what does this really mean for those that invest in mobile WCM application? What does this mean for those that don't? Scott, I'll start with you.
So I think this is really interesting because there's a saying out there that's mobile first, right? And as a matter of fact, Tom is one of the folks who came and spoke at our conference at the Gilbane Group, and he wants to talk about mobile first, and that's a big strategy that they're taking on. I tend to not agree. I don't love the whole mobile first idea. Because it sounds like a much more of a one-size-fits-all buzzword type of approach. There's plenty of businesses out there, I can name 20 off the top of my head, that don't necessarily need a strong mobile strategy per se. But the point that Tom makes, which I think is a really good one, is that what mobile does is just if you're thinking mobile, even if you're less worried about the strategy, your mobile presence, if you're thinking along that line, you're thinking about the kind of core capabilities or core things that people are coming to you for. Because your presence on a mobile device is much smaller and shrunk, and obviously you're going to say fewer things through that channel, right? So you're now focused on what are the core things, and it just makes you think about that which you have to say, which is most important, and now you're prioritizing your content. So I like the philosophy behind a mobile-first philosophy, even though I don't necessarily agree that it's a one-size-fits-all that everybody has to go mobile per se. That being said, the landscape is now such that if you aren't producing your content, if you don't have a CMS, that's not HTML5 compliant in the next couple of years and that sort of thing, and it is hard to read on a device, then you'll be left behind. It doesn't mean, though, that you have to have a specific foray into that. What are your thoughts? Sorry, I know.
Yeah, well, I would say that a big conversation is app versus web app.
Yeah, sure.
And I would say that for most companies, make the website look at least tolerable on a small screen. Mm-hmm. I mean, that gets you a lot of ways to the overall solution. So don't embarrass yourself on the phone.
That's a good point.
You'd be surprised about how many companies really A, need to do it, and B, are not doing it. Mm-hmm. And I was talking with a client a while ago that most of their traffic originates from email newsletter subscriptions. So it's like a third or almost 40%. And they had a really hard time selling advertisement on their websites because a lot of their advertisers, their websites were so bad on mobile. It was embarrassing to have a click-through to their website. So I do think there's kind of an awareness, even though it's like not a core audience, but you have to realize that a lot of people who are on the web now that don't have a computer anymore.
No question. And that's across whether you're B2B or B2C or whatever. I think we oftentimes think of the consumer world because we think of ourselves in that consumer position, but many of these guys are B2B and saying, I don't need to have it. But I think what's happening is our expectations as an individual consumer are being raised, right? That we expect, what we expect from Amazon, we're now starting to expect, that experience that you have there, you're starting to expect in your business life as well. So I think there's no question that it's the big topic.
Excellent. Really cool stuff, without a question. Now, we also wanted to reiterate the fact that a lot of people are, in fact, out on Twitter right now. So we wanted to go ahead and we wanted to bring out and see what you guys were actually talking about. And I advise you to make sure you're utilizing that hashtag CMS Connected hashtag because it's excellent. I love to see that you guys are out there continuing that conversation. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring up some of the tweets that we actually have right now. And do we have it right here? We do in fact have it. So we're going to go ahead and bring it right up. What do we got here right now, Phil? We have this one coming from, it looks like this one is coming from John Austin. He's saying post-acquisition, Google, this is what we were talking about before, guys, and this will lead us right into the next segment. FatWire, CQ5, Autonomy. Is their website presence a reflection of their focus on WCM? So your thoughts on that, guys, that statement right there.
Is their website presence a reflection of their focus on WCM?
Meaning their website's bad, does that mean they don't care about WCM?
So. Yeah.
Well, you could look at it as the cobbler's son with the bad shoes, but I think that's a risk that you run with really large organizations. If it's a large portfolio of products, the web organization is going to be small in their company, just like the product component is going to be small in their company as well. So you really can't judge the product by the marketing department, which might be in another...
and as sad as it is, I don't think it's a good judge. It's funny that Janusz Boy, who's an analyst overseas, put out a blog post last year, 2 years ago, about measure your CMS vendors by their own mobile presence. So in other words, he went and did like a review of the top 20, web CMS vendors and looked at their website from his mobile device, and at the time, like 18 or something failed the test, even though they were marketing the product. Since then, they've all improved it. Make sure you buy that, but no question. Didn't mean that they didn't have it as an offer.
He also had another blog post by rating your vendor by the pen that they give at their booth. So
that's right.
Excellent. Okay, so that basically leads us into the next segment that we're going to go ahead and talk about now, and that's some of the key acquisitions in 2011. Now, obviously, we really started discussing that right off the top of the show, so we're going to go ahead and kind of delve into them just a little bit more, and we're going to talk about the impacts, really, of all of them. So I'm going to kind of go through some of the lists. We can add some more as we go along as well, but, SDL acquires Alterian and builds an alliance with EMC. HP offered to acquire Autonomy. Oracle acquires FatWire. Limelight Networks acquires Clickability. Your thoughts on all of these acquisitions so far this year? Seth, I'll go to you with this one.
Well, I thought the one that was funniest was FatWire getting acquired by Oracle, and the reason why that is because after Adobe acquired Day, FatWire was the salespeople were going around and crowing about they're the last guys left. Like, how can you not buy from me? Because I'm the last CMS left. And like 6 months later, they get acquired. Probably a company that's less focused on web publishing and the overall publishing company. So I wonder how they're looping back after telling that story.
Right. Somebody who bought me, if that actually influenced the buy.
Yeah.
How's that guy feeling right now? They didn't get the memo, I don't think, early enough.
So, as far as all these different acquisitions, to you guys, we talk about impact, and we've been saying that a lot today. Well, which CMS vendors really made the biggest impact in 2011? And Scott, in your mind, who was it?
I actually think, and we've talked about them before, I actually think Adobe made the biggest impact.
And that was in 2010, and it's still...
Well, the acquisition was in 2010, so it didn't make this list of topics, but I think they made the biggest splash in 2011. Where, as we talked about, I really do think that there was a pretty ideal scenario there where it was kind of the tail wagging the dog, that obviously the much smaller company was acquired. But if you look at, where those, David Neusler and Kevin Cogan, the positions that those guys have gotten in the Adobe organization, the influence that they have there, that their architectural strategy has been just core and key. They're out there leading pursuits in the new standard for WEMI, and they're still doing all the things that they were doing before. Their presence in the Java world before was really just huge. They were very standards focused, and they're still leading it now. Adobe has just entered that conversation suddenly.
It's been impressive, I think that the one thing that they've struggled with is their sales force. And I would say just because their sales force comes from selling packaged software and not a lot of experience in enterprise software. So it's been, I think, the vision, the Day group has been able to espouse the vision and get that out, and that's been really great. But in terms of the sales messaging at the sales level, there's a disconnect there because those salespeople don't really understand like enterprise software and web content management. They can talk an hour about creative departments and helping them be more efficient, but in terms of large-scale implementations of $1 million services, they're just not there yet. So that's the challenge on the Day side to help train up that force, that sales force, and get them to have those conversations and talk to the right people in the organization that would be buying these products.
I think they'll tell you that they've quote unquote owned the CMO for a long time. That this Adobe suite of products has been in the hands of marketers forever. They've always cared about the creative process, and so now you're adding WCM and analytics. None of us knew what the heck why they bought Amateur for the longest time, and now finally that vision is showing us a little bit. So I think they're starting to have a lot more end-to-end capabilities, but again, whether they've integrated at that level or not, we'll see. I think they're going to start offering a lot of things in the cloud in the future, so we'll see how that shifts. Yeah, absolutely.
And we continue to talk about the impact. Who had the biggest impact? And obviously, we look back to 2009 to 2010 and how it carries over. But we have some other people out there continuing to jump on board with the conversation. I love to see this guys continue with this. It really is great. Innovation driven by likes of Ectron and Sitecore. What about open source? Well, what about open source, guys?
Well, I think open source is always at the cutting edge of a lot of what we do. A lot of companies are hosting their websites on WordPress and then also the standards piece. I feel like the open source community has been really good about keeping everybody else honest about standards, because these are people that care about sharing and collaboration, whereas that intent on the commercial side has to be balanced with competition. So yeah, I think that the open source innovation, probably not in 2011 as much, but certainly in earlier years, the innovation was huge on the
I think the
open
open source, the notion of open source hasn't come up as much. I mean, certainly we're not going to be talking about acquisitions when we're talking about open source. We're not going to even talk about pivoting towards the enterprise. There are not many that have tried to do that, but I'll say that I think that was one of the things that I saw happen in 2011 from an open source standpoint, is that enterprise orientation. I think they kind of feel like, okay, we own the consumer market. The person who just wants to spin up a website easily, or a really small business, we dominate there. We want to move upwards and onwards to essentially really be able to fill out. They've all showed, if you look at any open source company, they've all showed the on their NASCAR slide of clients, they've showed the big names for a really long time. What they didn't tell you was it was some little
Small
marketing
department.
spinoff that was done, a rogue website that somebody did, and they hashed it up on their own. But now they're really trying to start to own the .coms, and I think who we see leading that is Drupal the most, from the standpoint of being kind of the widest out there. That Brian Ruby and those guys they're really sorry, not Brian Ruby. Anyway, Brian House, is really pivoting them towards the enterprise a lot. They're talking a lot there. They're doing a lot more from the standpoint of the robust, on the platform itself, the changes that they're making, the things that they're trying to get their platform to do. This notion of, when we talk about engagement, we're talking about the WCM being kind of the hub of a lot of all these capabilities and bring them together. Certainly in an open source, open standards world, you start being able to talk about these integrations and stuff like that much more easily. So they're trying to make that case, I think, a lot more.
Yeah, you almost even could say that for 2011, open source was focusing on more blending in than setting themselves apart. Because they're starting to compete against the commercial suppliers, and so it's not as much an innovation thing. Yeah, exactly. But I would say that the one area that they're probably, the greatest potential is in this whole semantic web RDF, and that's an area where Dries is very interested in. But I don't know how much the market can kind of follow him in that direction. If he goes too far, he's going to just walk away from where everybody else is. So
absolutely. You're seeing the commercial open source though become real competitors. The Hippos of the world, the Magnolias of the world. There's some commercial open source ones that are making really good splashes and getting good attention, I think. So.
All right, guys. So now what I would like to do, obviously we've talked a lot about 2011, but you know what? It's in the past. Forget about them. Let's take a look at 2012. Let's break out the crystal balls if we can and kind of see exactly where that's going to head, and kind of to lead us into this discussion as to where the CMS industry is headed inside 2012. I'm going to go ahead and get to this tweet right here from Dave saying, who will be acquired next? Sitecore, Ektron, CMS Connected? Where's the industry headed? Who's going to be acquired next, guys?
I know you have all these theories, so I'll defer to you on this.
There's been a talk about Sitecore for a long time. I mean, people have been spinning a lot of stuff around that they have inside information, and I think the most likely candidate for something like that would be a Microsoft, who I think is finally either A, realizing, or B, admitting that they are not so good in the web content management world. SharePoint isn't it? But I don't see that happening. I don't know. I certainly talked to the Sitecore folks an awful lot, and I don't think that that's in their plans. I think if something like that were underway, they would have been. It would have happened by now. I think they've had plenty of quarters, and if there's a time to pick them up, it's now. Ektron, on the other hand, very, very, very highly potential. From a Microsoft, if they're looking for somebody, especially now with their new platform. I think, though, the most likely next one that we'll see, and you can call me here on it, is I think that SAP is going to acquire EpiServer. Sorry, is that who I'm thinking? Yeah, no, it's not EpiServer. I apologize. I think that SAP is going to acquire the other German-based, oh my goodness gracious, Core Media, sorry. Okay. I think that SAP is going to acquire Core Media. The reason I say that is because, again, in this engagement thing, the two of them are partnering up. We've always been talking about if you look at customer experience management, and that customer experience is really, I think, so much more about the true term, the true definition of customer, more so than just the prospect. Therefore, being not just the domain of the marketer, but of the support team and everybody who owns the customers internally. Well, who's got all that information inside your organization? SAP dominates there. They dominate the ERP. They dominate all of that. And so why haven't they entered this space? Well, right around the corner over there in Germany is good old Core Media, who I think has had a great product for a long time. They haven't done a whole lot in the U.S. market, frankly, but they have a good reputation, I think, as a solid system. I think they're already starting to partner together. I think that's the next acquisition we'll see.
Yeah, that could be. It's an interesting buyer there because, I was a little bit surprised when a search vendor went shopping for a WCM, and so I know not to be too surprised, but
Right,
I wouldn't have expected SAP to be even in that area, but it makes a lot of sense.
I think now that we're talking about customer experience, I think they enter the conversation now immediately.
Totally, yeah.
And now we mentioned how everybody is considered continuing on Twitter as well. And it's funny, as the conversation gets a little more heated and more insights are rolling in, more people have questions, more people have comments, and it is excellent to see. I absolutely love it, guys. Keep with it. So tweeting at you, Scott, saying you don't think Acquia is making a go at enterprises on Drupal?
Yeah, that's the same. That's what I said.
Okay.
So Acquia being, Dries' company, Dries was the founder of Drupal, and Acquia, I mentioned Brian House. Brian House is the CMO of Acquia. So they're a services group that does all of their work on Drupal, and essentially, while they don't come out and say it, they essentially lead the Drupal strategy. I mean, that's that. It's Drupal as a project, it's an open source platform, but they lead that. So they are pivoting towards
They have the benevolent dictator. So
exactly.
What else are you going to do with that? Okay.
Yeah, so they are pivoting towards the enterprise, no question about it.
Sure, and they're successful too.
Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely.
They're making headway.
Yeah, especially in the publishing world.
Definitely. No, without a question with that, for sure. Now, let's move on. So I'm going to start with you. I mean, everybody likes to look at the quadrant, the magic quadrant. So
Yes.
what's the quadrant going to look like in 2012?
You shouldn't ask me about the quadrant because my experience is I'm more focused on the buyers.
Okay.
And looking at their requirements. So I tend not to look so much at the quadrants and everything. And it's funny because when we talk about predictions of 2011, my angle is I'm just hoping that the majority of buyers get to where CMS vendors were in 2010. So I'm kind of a little bit behind the cutting edge in where things are going. But yeah, whenever I look at these quadrants, I'm always scratching my head, and I realize that it doesn't really reflect that much about what's important to the buyers out there. Certainly makes them pretty graphic.
Yeah, I think that probably the easiest prediction that I would make, and which is going to come off as a slam at Gartner, and I don't really mean it that way, really, but the easiest way to answer that question is that it's going to look pretty similar, because it looked similar last year and the year before and the year before that, regardless of the changes that these guys have made. So other than combining names when one acquires the other and they have to make a change to it, unfortunately the thing looks the same year after year. So that's my kind of prediction on that point.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Fair enough. No, without a question.
But
so we can move on from that though, because we obviously talked about what was kind of the buzz in 2011. We talked about mobile. We talked about cloud. What technology is going to be the buzz in 2012? I mean, is it going to be continuing with mobile? Is it going to be social? Is it going to be more engagement? Or are we literally looking at something that's going to be totally new that we're actually not really thinking of right now? What's your thoughts on that, Scott?
Sure. So we talked about this. You'll kind of take the buyer side of this about what's going to happen, and I'll take the vendor side. I think there's no question that there's going to be more and more pivoting towards this engagement. What I hope is going to happen is, and the buzzword again is customer experience. There's going to be more and more pivot towards customer experience. Unfortunately, there's going to be renaming of platforms, customer experience platforms, which I absolutely detest. But I think what that starts to mean is that we're going to see, in the commercial world at least, more and more of this kind of out-of-box integrations with other systems. We're going to see a lot more ability to plug and play, whether they're building the capability directly and they've partnered with others, swallowing up more and more. SDL we haven't talked a lot about. I should have named them as kind of one of the bigger players. They've done some of the acquisitions, much like Episerver, who I mistakenly mentioned earlier, where they're buying up these kind of small social things, or this semantic group, or this search, or their whatever. They're kind of picking up these pieces. They bought Fred Hopper a couple of years ago. So as a way to do their personalization, and I think they've just acquired Alterian as well that you mentioned. So I think you're going to see more and more of those types of things filling out that kind of full service. We can do all these customer experience stuff. I think what I hope that you'll start to see from the SaaS vendors, because certainly one of the things that's on people's minds is, again, this orientation towards the cloud. We see more and more SaaS vendors entering this market. So we saw a couple of them launch this year. And I think what I hope to see is them actually offering these kind of partnerships, these go-to-market partnerships with, whether it's the CRM where you're talking about Salesforce.com or whatever, entering the market actually together as a package deal and saying, look, you've been less likely to test us in the past, which is, everybody's talking about it, but who is buying SaaS WCM? Not many, frankly, right? But if we can offer you all these services, like literally out of the box capability that you can come and have of them, or you're already a Salesforce customer, come on and join us over in the WCM world too. I think you'll see more of that. I hope you will from their perspective. I think that's what they have to do to continue to survive personally.
Yeah. Well, my prediction for 2012 is going to be less a little bit on the technology side and more on the business side, which is I'm seeing like a reinvention of the CMO. The Chief Marketing Officer. Mm-hmm. And I think there are technology implications of that, but I think that prior to all this social and multi-platform, the Chief Marketing Officer could be creative and set the vision for things and just hand it to the agency, and they would handle everything. They would handle buying the advertising spots and all that. And what's happening now, which the conversation is going two ways, and the cycle is a lot faster. And they're being all of a sudden responsible for the execution of all these programs. And the programs require a lot of this, circular feedback with the audience. So those buyers are going to be looking for tools that facilitate that new role of being responsible for the execution of marketing, but also the outcomes and proving that there's progress being made. So you'll see a lot of kind of social marketing type of tools, and the ability of everything to fit together nicely is going to be huge. And I think cloud is also going to be nice because they're all of a sudden responsible for the website, and that the infrastructure piece is one thing they don't want to be bothered with.
Interesting, really is. Okay, so we talked a lot about the vendors in particular. So the last question, we're running a little short on time. So the last question I really have for you guys, talking about 2012, what's coming up? Here we are, the beginning of January. So I want to know, as far as WCM vendors are concerned, which ones are really primed to make the big difference this year? Why? Scott.
Boy, I wasn't paid at all by any of these guys beforehand. No, I think the ones that have some of the biggest potential this year. Let's think about it in terms of like kind of widespread impact. I actually think we've talked about Drupal. I think Drupal can have a really big impact this year if they hone that message and they do start. They certainly have the brand power, right? They certainly have the millions of implementations that are out there. Is that right? Millions? Probably in the millions. At least millions of pages, no question about that. So they're very widespread, and they're relatively well liked. I think they have the ability to make a pretty large splash if they hone that message right and if they orient towards the enterprise. They could make a big splash. Certainly of the ones that we've talked about though too, I think you've got Adobe that's positioned pretty well. We've talked about them. I think how they again shift from a shrink-wrapped packaging company to an enterprise software play is going to tell a lot. But I think there are some really nice innovators out there, the Sitecores of the world. We haven't talked about them at all, and I think they're kind of less of a best of breed and more of an all-in-one sort of approach. But I think they're doing some really nice things with their product. I really like some of what the, matter of fact, I think, and I'll just state this now, I've said that I really hate renaming web experience management system or whatever. I think those guys and the likes of them who actually do offer all of the parts of that capability, whether you like that approach or you don't like that approach, they actually might be able to wear that label where the other ones are just kind of WCM plus. But anyway,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Well, I think in the U.S., every year we see more and more European vendors having more visibility here. So that's definitely going to change the dynamic of the sales process. You know, where we have newcomers in that are getting partners and systems integration partners. So there's a lot of shakeup because the SIs now have more options to partner with. So I think at the base standard web content management, that's going to have somewhat of an impact. The upper tier Java, I feel like there's a lot of room there now that with all those acquisitions, other than Adobe and Day, which we tend to like, but the other ones, I think there's a lot of room for companies like Terminal 4, you know, and GX to kind of get in there. Because you know they have a compelling story of being able to maintain their focus. But in terms of reinventing the category, I think the company that's probably the closest to it is Adobe.
We will certainly see. So there you have it, folks. That'll basically wrap up the show for this January, the first show of the new year. So Scott, Seth, excellent show, guys. We really love being here with you guys today.
Thanks so much. I like the format and I like the desk.
The desk actually helps quite a bit. We're able to use the laptops and so on and so forth. So excellent. So that's going to be it for today's show. Hope you folks at home and in your offices enjoyed our look back at 2011, the WCM year in review. Before we go, like to mention the fact that on January 25th, 2012, Scott is actually going to be conducting a free webinar on the 5 steps for enhancing your online customer engagement. And that's where where can people go, Scott, for that?
I'm partnered up with Sitecore on that. I think you can go to their website and look at their events or whatever that are coming. I think we're doing it in 3 different markets over the course of a week or so. So yeah.
Excellent, super. So that, not to mention that, but also want to remind you folks to sign up again for the next CMS Connected show, a 60-minute debate on the Web CMS ranking reports, as we talked before about the Magic Quadrant and the Forrester Wave. Finally, we have to make sure we thank our sponsors, Falcon Software and CM Pros. And of course, we obviously have to thank Scott and our special guest, Seth, as well. I am Tyler Pipert of the Pulse Network. We're looking forward to seeing you next time right here on CMS Connected.